Alright, here we are, month 2 for the hourglass. Here's our fabrics cut. We need a 5.5 inch square of both fabrics 2 and 3. Two 2 3/4 by 6 inch rectangles of fabric 4. And for fabrics 5 and 6, a 2 3/4 by 6 inch rectangle also. So let's get started. First thing to do is to take our 2 squares and make half square triangles out of them. So how are we going to do that? Well, take one of your rectangles, or squares, turn it over, and use an appropriate marking pencil or pen, whatever you prefer, maybe a friction, erasable, or a pencil. I prefer using a chalk pencil, and since this is kind of dark, I'm going to look for and see if I can find my white or pink one. So here's my white pencil. Let's see if this will show up nice. And I'm just going to draw a line very carefully from side to side. Now, for those of you that use the Studio 180 tools, this would be a good time to use your magic wand. And then you would draw 2 lines, which will be your stitching lines. Well, the white didn't show up. Let's see if the gray shows up any better. There, we can see the gray line. Now that we have our line drawn, we're going to layer our 2 squares together, right sides together, and we're going to stitch a 1/4 inch on either side of this drawn line. Come back here when you've got that done, and I'll show you what to do next. Alright, I've stitched on either side of the drawn line, and now we want to just cut these 2 apart along the drawn line. So I put my ruler down, and here we have our 2 half square triangles that we need. We're going to press the seams to the right, to the dark side rather. So in our case, that's our fabric 2. So in my case, it's my fabric 2. It's could be 2 or 3 depending on your fabric selection. So let's do that. So our ironing surface. Again, the proper thing to do is to set your seams by pressing carefully, and then roll that seam back from the right side. Roll the fabric back from the right side, and there you'll have a nice pressed half square triangle, but it's got some dog ears on it. So let's set that aside and press the other one. Again, I set the seams, and then I carefully roll back fabric over the seam. Beautiful. Now, what we need are 5 inch half square triangles, and these are oversized. If we get our ruler and bring it over, we'll see that, you know, we're at like 5 1/8 or something. Okay? So what we want to do is, again, use the diagonal on your ruler and set it right on your pieced half square triangle, and put it as far up as you can and still have it on. And so we just got a little tiny bit to trim off of 2 sides. A little bit there and a little bit there. Okay. Now rotate it 180 degrees. Put your 5 inch ruler lines on the sides of your unit. Your diagonal on your ruler should be on that seam line, and now trim off the other 2 sides. And there we have a perfect 5 inch half square triangle unit. Let's see that again. 45-degree line, 45-degree line, right on the seam, right on the seam. Push the ruler up as far as you can and still have fabric on the two sides. There should be a little bit sticking out on every one of the four sides when we get it in position. Not a lot, just a little bit. And trim, trim. See, just a little. Rotate your block. Position your ruler. 5-inch, 5-inch. Not quite. That diagonal should be on your seam line. Trim, trim. 2 perfect 5-inch half square triangles. Now, to complete the block, what we're going to do is we're going to stitch our fabric 4 strips to our fabric 5 and 6 strips. So just put them right sides together, take them over to your machine, and stitch them together using a 1/4-inch seam. I'll come back here and we'll press them and get busy with the rest of this. Okay, now that we have our strips stitched together, we're going to set the seam, both sides. And then our instructions say to press the seam toward fabric 4, and that's the one that the strip sets have in common. So now that we have it set, roll back fabric 4. And press. There's one done. And there's the other. Now what we're going to do is cut 2 2¾ pieces off of each of these strip sets. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to align my ruler with a line right along the seam. I want my seam line to be perpendicular to my cuts. So I'm going to square up the end to make sure that my seam line is perpendicular to the end. Then rotate the piece around and measure over your 2 3/4. And again, you want to make sure you have a line on the seam and then your lines at the freshly cut edge. Okay, there's one. Now we want a second. Now if you're fortunate, when you line up the line on the seam line, your edge will be nice and square. And what I see here is that mine is a little off up here, and that happens sometimes, so I'm going to re-square my edge. It's a little bit wider down here. I'm just shaving off just a little bit of a piece. And then again, I'm going to cut my 2 3/4 section. I have a nice straight edge I can line up against. And there we are. There's those two. We're going to repeat that with the other one. Meet you back here when we got your pieces. Alright, now that we have our pieces cut, you take one of each set, and those you're going to stitch together in your 4 patch. Now, since we pressed the seams toward fabric 4 in both cases, these 4 patches are going to nest, the seams on these are going to nest perfectly together so that we can stitch and make our 4 patches. So we need to do that with both pairs. Make 2 4 patches. And meet me back here and we'll see what we need to do. Now we have our 4 patches sewn, set our seam, roll one side back, got a nice intersection because we nested those seams as we sewed. And then we want to furl the seam. This one's going clockwise, clockwise, clockwise. Pop it open, clockwise. So the seams all spin around that intersection. And we have a nice little 4 patch so that we have a smoother laying unit. Let's see that again. Press, 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 press. Roll back. Look at that nice intersection. And then clockwise, clockwise, clockwise. Now, depending on how you pressed, yours might be counterclockwise rather than clockwise. The point is 3 of the seams will be going in one direction, and you want to force that 4th seam to go in the other direction. You may need to use a seam ripper to pop a couple of stitches right here. I use a 2.5 stitch, and that size stitch will pop by itself. And you can see it's plenty small enough of a stitch. You don't see any of the thread. I'm piecing with gray thread, and you don't see it against any of these fabrics. All right, now that we have the 4 patches done, let's arrange them with our fabric 2 and fabric 3 half square triangle units. And if we follow the numbering of the fabrics in the same order as it's going to look something like that. This is my fabric 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So again, we have a 4 patch just like we did in the Indian hatchets. So we're going to stitch our pairs together, press our seams to one side, and in this case, because there is a seam, because there is a seam in the 4 patch and not in the seam on the edge of the half square triangle, I'm going to press my seams toward the half square triangle, which will work perfectly because that'll put the one on the top going to the right, the one on the bottom going to the left, so that I can nest the seams and sew the pairs together. I'll meet you back here when I've got my 4 patch sewn together so we can press and furl the seams on the back. All right, we're at the final pressing. We're going to set our seam, press, press, press. We're going to roll back one side. Make sure we don't get any puckers in that seam. Didn't do quite as perfect on that, but with the busy prints you don't really see the intersection. And then we're going to look on the back, and we've got counterclockwise, 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 counterclockwise. This is the offending seam that needs to be pushed in the other direction. I'm just going to pop it open right there, and then we can press this seam the rest of the way. Make sure everything is lying nice and flat. So we've got furled seams for each of our 4 patches and one less press on the front. And there you have it. There's the Hourglass block, month 2 of the 2017 Cheshire Quilters Guild block of the month. See you back here for block 3 next month.